Okay, hey guys, it's your IT job coach here, and today is a special video. I've got my good friend James Van Kessel here, who is a Google Cloud engineer. So, James, you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Sure, thanks, Rick. Hi, my name is James Van Kessel, as Rick said. I'm a cloud customer engineer at Google. I've been there for 3 years, and what I've been doing is a lot of new customer onboarding. So I get to talk to a lot of customers who are new to the cloud, and so I get an interesting perspective on the challenges they face when they're trying to discover what the cloud is like compared to their on-prem environment. So it's been a really good environment for me to take what was an IT career focused on on-prem and infrastructure type of technology that's in a traditional enterprise and turning that into a cloud base. So that's where I'm at.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And yeah, so for a lot of you folks that are getting into the cloud environment, you work with folks like James to get yourself into the cloud. So if your organization is moving certain services or anything like that, James is sort of the expert that comes in and helps you with your cloud architects move into that migration. And again, this video is just a personal, I guess, call, we'll call it, and it's not really sanctioned by Google or my own company. So just take this with a grain of salt. That is our personal opinions and
Mhm.
not reflecting of our organization.
Yes, I should say everything I say is all personal opinion. I'm not representing Google here, even though I'm a Googler. But this is all my personal
Googler.
thoughts. Yes, yes, we
Awesome.
actually call ourselves that internally.
Awesome. Thanks, James, for doing this. So my audience is typically a lot of people that are in universities moving on to a full-time career. They
Mm.
hear cloud is the thing they want to get into. And then we also have a lot of people that are transitioning from different types of IT roles into a cloud architect role. And then we also have those that are doing something completely non-IT related, and they're trying to get into an IT job and they want to get into cloud. So in the first step, I think really I got a lot of questions about all things to cover, but let's set a baseline. And can you talk about the different cloud roles that you've seen in customers that you deal with, from the entry level to architects, and sort of explain what they do?
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of people you work with when you're trying to help a big organization get onto the cloud. So I'll just comment that I've worked with a lot of larger organizations rather than, I'll say, mom and pop IT shops that are relatively small. So a lot of my experience is going to be about a medium to large enterprise. But you find there's a lot of roles. So number one, going for the bottom up entry level type of roles. Those would be typically people who are the title varies, but the people who are configuring the cloud on a daily basis, they're administering some minor, say, deployments of new technology. Let's say a new project's come along, and they're actually applying a configuration, or quite often in a troubleshooting role. So that often gets lumped together into I'll call it an entry level cloud administration, maybe a cloud operations type of role. So that's one level. Next level, I think is cloud engineering, and I think of a couple of customers I have where they define the role as cloud engineering, but I think it's more like a cloud architect in some companies, in terms of name, and that's where you're actually trying to take a business problem and define here's how it maps to the services we have available in the cloud, and say, okay, you need these requirements, these are the right technologies in the cloud we have available, so that you can achieve your business goals, really. So they have to have some idea of the business context, but they also are a very technical person. So they're going to be
Yes.
designing, sometimes even writing things like Terraform code or deployment manager in Google Cloud, to automate the deployment and get it set up. Um, I'd say after that, there are higher level roles, but those are usually more management and business decision makers. So
Yes.
quite often there's a council of some kind in a customer made up of enterprise architects that are multidisciplinary. So they're not just about the cloud, but they're also concerned with enterprise concerns, authentication, networking, security. And so a council of those people who are more enterprise architects, not just focus on the cloud, still also have to have a serious understanding of the cloud to do that job.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because when you get, and the names actually change depending on where you live, what kind of company. Every company actually, sometimes they don't have a formal way of structuring what an architect is, and they might call a junior person an architect, and they at no way serve the actual architect role. And there's a big confusion in the industry because AWS teaching you a very basic how to use the AWS dashboard would call that certification an architect certification.
Yeah.
And after
Same
having
at
that,
Google. Yeah. Same
yes,
at Google.
and you don't have the skill sets to actually be an architect. So this is where there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace. I say bad job on a lot of the companies that actually do that and call these jobs, call these certification architect. Is basically the first step in learning an architecture role.
I would actually, if I could comment on that. So an architect is not just a technical designation, right? So you can go take what's called an architect certification, and it should give you all of the baseline knowledge for someone with an architect mindset to be able to apply that and make good decisions about designing, let's say, an application in the cloud using various cloud components. But I think, to your point, what it doesn't teach is the fundamentals of thinking like an architect. So
Yes.
a good architect has to pay attention to, and I've been an architect in various roles in IT and cloud for years, so I've got a perspective here where I think it's about thinking in terms of satisfying requirements. So understanding the real reason, not just the stated, hey, I want an app that does X, but what problem are you trying to solve? What will it do for you if you solve this problem? And knowing that, you can make good decisions about, well, if I built it the way you described it to me, that really won't solve the fundamental problem. If we build it this way, it scales for future, it whatever the bigger problem is that they're trying to solve. So that I think of as more about architect's mindset that you can't necessarily get just from certification training, but you get from dealing with projects over many years.
Perfect. So that's great. And I'm going to probably explain this further in another video later on to just talk about enterprise architect, which is, in some organizations or VP level ownership. And then we'll have architects and application architects and all kinds of things. So I might actually break that into a separate video because that's a big topic on its own. But for the entry level, can you talk about more into the entry level and what they do?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the entry level, again, it varies by the size of the company. So I often find smaller companies, they tend to consolidate a lot of the cloud engineering and cloud operations parts that I think of as entry level, whereas the ops part being more entry level. But when you have a large enough organization, I'd say the entry level is really dealing with day-to-day issues such as, hey, this project we stood up or this environment we stood up for a particular application, they need an extra permission or they need an extra feature turned on and enabled. They could go and execute on configuring that, whether it's manual configuration of the cloud, updating a Terraform template and pushing it into the validation process. But someone else would have to be eyes on that to approve that change, right? So I think of them as someone who can, make basic decisions about the cloud, implementation and are probably aspiring to be more involved in the design levels, right? That's the next level for them. It's more interesting work when you can actually deal with the requirements. So in terms of day to day, you have to be able to understand various technologies, like fundamental things like networking will never go away. Understanding the basics of whatever cloud you're working in as far as identity and access management, right?
Yeah, I am.
IAM is a key part, right? And I think it's people aren't used to the idea yet that the kind of security you used to rely on, the hard shell GUI center firewall model, is now completely implemented in IAM. So being able to think in terms of IAM permission setting and granting is a key skill for those people to not only to configure things but to troubleshoot, right? 90% of the time, the first thing when you check a troubleshooting issue is the permission granted properly, and that's usually the first answer is no. Oh, we forgot this, or didn't know we needed that. So yeah, things like fundamental networking, IP networking, identity access management, those are always going to be required skill sets for that role.
Okay, and then so that's great. Like I guess Linux skills, the fundamentals stuff like networking, always required. And then on the cloud, because cloud has about 60 to 70 different services, depending on which provider. Google, I know, has a ton of services. Amazon, or even IBM has their own flavors of certain clouds.
Yeah.
So if you had to focus and really specialize, is it better to specialize on 10 core skills in the cloud, like the Google Compute Engine and stack drivers, which is, I guess, the monitoring and reporting capabilities? What would you say are the 10 things you really need to focus on? Or, and here's the second part, is it better to have a specialty like AI and really get deep into the AI?
Wow. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. The first thing I want to mention is, and I'm probably delinquent in mentioning this. I should have mentioned it in the last section was coding. So not being an exceptional coder, but understanding how to do basic scripting. I'd say that's a fundamental skill of an entry level position, and it doesn't go away as you go up
Yes.
the chart. I think it's probably a given these days, but I want to mention that. So that's probably one of the big ones in the top 10
Yes,
skills
apologies.
anyway.
So coding, network, and what was the last one we were talking about?
Well, I think you mentioned admin, but
Linux,
IAM
yes.
permissions, and basic system administration, like even
Okay.
just being able to operate in a Linux environment to do basic tasks, right? So that
Yes.
is probably a key thing. And again, that's an easy thing to get practice with. You can get a Linux instance from a lot of different places, very cheap. Go play with it, go experiment with it, that sort of thing. So those are probably four key ones, right?
Yes.
Code, IAM, security, networking, and Linux. I'd say another important thing, especially the state the industry is in, is a security mindset, an idea of what is a secure and insecure thing to do. For example, there are 10 different ways I could set up a compute workload to run to solve a problem, but
Exactly.
9 of them are probably insecure in some way or other for a particular use case. So you really need to understand what is and is not allowed in your security structure in your organization and help to maintain that. And the reason it's so important at the state of the industry right now, many organizations are just trying to learn how to use cloud properly and
Yes.
learning to trust it. And part of that learning to trust is setting up frameworks that you work within that are secure, or just trusting people. And this is the hard part because IAM permissions, if you grant the wrong person the right permissions, they make a mistake, well, you've had a breach. So this is why having a security mindset and always asking questions like, how is this secured? What are the threats I need to protect against? Definitely a key skill. I think, is that number 5? I've lost track of how many we've mentioned, but I think
Yes.
that would be one of the top 10 for sure.
I totally agree. I think those cover a lot of the basics in
Yeah.
there.
I think the other main concept to understand is blob storage. So the idea of S3 storage, or in Google Cloud, cloud storage. Just the idea of how that blob storage works and is different from typical block storage attached to virtual machines. There are different applications for each. Definitely want to understand that to some degree. And I think those are the core things if I was talking about a skill base. But the other side of your question was around
Deep on a
what,
specialty.
yeah, like would a specialty be a better path? So I think a specialty makes more sense when you already have background in a particular area.
Yes.
So if I were going to, and I was in this position, if I was going to go from an infrastructure background that was off cloud, was standard IT, and try to learn cloud, it's best to do something you have an interest in. Do something you have some background in related to the cloud. So, for example, I could sit down and go take an entire cloud architect exam and learn all about everything they cram into that topic
Yes.
in the certification. But if I want to get some real experience, I'm going to have to find something that's interesting to me to develop and build. And you and I personally know, we worked together on something in a past job together where we tried to
Yes.
solve an internal problem by pulling out our brushing off our Java coding skills or various skills and building a mobile app. That caught my interest and developed my skills because we had a particular problem to solve. I did the same thing personally when I was starting to work on a personal project. As you know, I'm a karate practitioner, and at the dojo I go to, we were just trying to digitize the content from years and years of traditional, photocopied handbooks. So I had a personal interest in developing an app that made that easy. So that drove me to go and learn the skills that literally got me into cloud. Right, I built an entirely cloud-based back end. All of it was skills that led me to, frankly, to my job in Google out of a non-cloud type of space. So why I mentioned this story is if you have a passion or a skill set in something, let's say you're a backup professional or a database professional, go and learn those things in the cloud. Go learn how databases are different from on-prem in the cloud. Go learn how to migrate from on-prem to the cloud. All of those aspects of something that will make it easier for you to pick up the skills in the cloud that are relevant and can help you show depth in an interview process that usually looks for, hey, at least you know one or two key topics that are relevant to cloud. Great, the rest we can build on. That's usually a big part of it.
Awesome. Sorry. We're going to take a quick break right now, and then we'll be right back with more questions with James, and hope this is helping you guys. We're taking a lot of the questions you guys have put in my forum and my website and my blogs, and those that have asked me in our Zoom videos. So I hope this is helping you guys, and we'll be right back. Okay, thank you guys. That was a quick break as James and I got our drinks and everything like that. So follow up with part 2 is more about the interviews into getting into cloud roles. So there's always lots of behaviors, myself as a hiring manager, what I see. And then I guess, James, you do a lot of interviews. You want to talk about your experience a bit of obviously what you're comfortable with?
Sure. Yeah. So obviously I can't talk about anything that's proprietary to how Google does interviews, but in terms of the behaviors, the way people respond, I wanted to talk about a couple topics. Like, for example, quite often people will know one particular cloud and not another, or they may know a technology on-prem and not the cloud aspect of it. When a candidate is asked a question they're not comfortable with, I often see them try to bluster their way through. So, for example, if I ask someone about Kubernetes, they may say, "Oh yeah, it's this thing where you have containers and there's pods," and they throw out a whole bunch of jargon that they think sounds great. And it
Yes.
turns out that really the interviewer knows so much more about it than they do, and they know they're just spouting off acronyms. They really don't have practitioner level skill set, right? So I think the one piece of advice in terms of interviewing is, be confident in what you know and talk about what you know and show that depth, show that skill set, but don't try to fake it. It'll show. That's the one thing you never want to do.
Awesome. Cool. And yeah, I've done a bunch of videos about interviews. I put one out last night. Hope that helps. We got a bunch of people that actually took the advice of my previous videos for putting up your resume, and they messaged me. I was like, Rick, I got an interview, and it was great. So
that's exciting.
Those guys, yeah, they're going for their interviews, and I think one's coming up on Monday. So it's
good luck.
That all the stories. Thanks for sharing your stories. I love to hear the stories, especially what works. And I'm always there to help you guys get to that next step in your career. So, James, on your side, I guess during those interviews, I talk about also a better approach in those scenarios when you get thrown in and you just don't know. It's not okay to lie. I never lie because people recognize that right away. They ask you because they have some experience from their own background. And when you just throw out names, it becomes very obvious you're just doing that. Your brand gets tarnished right there. I remember on one of my interviews, I asked someone, what soft skills are you developing right now? And this is a tough question because there's only 5% of people in the world that are developing soft skills actively. And even if I asked you that, how would you answer?
It's funny you mentioned that. We inside Google, we've had a number of I'll call it planned trainings that everyone is expected to take, or at least in our department is expected to take, and a number of them have been about what you could call soft skills. For example, whiteboarding skills. I mean, even that, and how you communicate with an audience, how you maintain a cadence in a conversation with them. That can be an area you can develop without having a technical skill. It's just conversations, understanding who you're talking to. And I'd say it's very important to have those soft skills, but you can develop them over time. It really boils down to a few key things. Like number one is, active listening, making sure that you're understanding what's being said to you and you're reflecting it back. There's respect for others, right? Recognizing everyone has motivations and what they're trying to achieve, and understanding those will help you, meet their expectations, right? So key things like that are things that they might seem obvious, but you do have to stop, like you say, and actively develop them by thinking, did I do that? Did I, listen to the person before responding? Did I, consider their perspective? Those sorts of things are fundamental. definitely.
And that's a very good conversation. That's a very good topic because in my own career, and as I manage a lot of people and I mentor and I do a lot of these things on private groups, what I've seen is there's actually, I'll say 10% of the people I work with are givers and 90% are the consumers.
Hmm.
You can tell because those are the people that leave comments, positive feedback. They try to help you in a constructive way. And then there are people that just consume and they disappear. And sometimes they consume and they fight you as well. So they would argue against it and throw out negatives. So it's
Yeah.
funny that you say that. And what I see with the 10% is a lot of those 10% just quickly move up into the organization. They develop lots of skills. They grow their networks a lot because they're always out there helping people.
It's funny you mentioned that. Like, I'd almost stretch that a little further and ask, would you say you've seen another percentage which are not so much givers, but they're willing to give when asked, right? So maybe there's some portion of that 90% which are typically consumers, but when asked, hey, could you contribute to this? They're very
Yeah.
willing to. They may not be proactively giving, but they're responsive.
Yes. So those are. So I'll give you this sort of analogy. So think about you as you grew up through elementary school, high school, whatever education, and when you were growing up, you were a kid and people provided for you. They told you what to do. You didn't give back to the family. You didn't give back to the community. You were just there consuming what the family is providing to you. Then
Hmm.
you get to a stage in your life where your maturity comes up and you start helping out the house. You start cleaning up after yourself. You start helping your family with chores in your house. And then at one point, you're going to be running your own house where you're
Hmm.
leading and you're helping other people. So it's a natural progression as well on that. And as you move up in your career, the more you show those skills. And I'm going to do some videos later on progression because after the interview series, I'm going to be talking about career progression. And it's actually common traits. And a lot of people are stalled. And I had this one individual message me last night. And I feel for him because he's stuck in a career and it's affecting his health.
Mm.
And those are the ones that I'll try to help the most because it is a bad place to be in. And when your job, you're trying to provide for your family and you're personally getting hit on the health wise, it's in a terrible spot to be in. So I'll try to prioritize on my videos to help that mindset as well.
Hmm. Definitely.
Is there anything else you want to cover on, I guess, our last couple of minutes here?
Oh yeah, before we go, one of the things I really wanted to point out is the importance of networking. So this sounds like this is an extension of the soft skills we were talking about.
Mhm.
Is no, you want to find people that have a similar mindset, and work with them over long periods of time. And building your network of colleagues, of partners outside of your organization, the broader the better. Um, it can have a lot of benefits. Number one is when there are new opportunities, your network will think about you, right? So, for example, you and I actually have a long history together of working at different places. We've worked together before. You were always a cutting edge person as far as I thought. You always had the eye to the future ahead of me, and you noticed, hey, there's a great opportunity over here. You pursued it, and when you realized it was something that would be a good fit for me, you would reach out and say, hey, James, I think you'd do really well here. And that's the power of the network, right? Knowing people and giving them what you can, so that when they have something to offer, they think about you to offer it. And so in each case that happened, you were very helpful in mentoring me, because you would identify, hey, I know you know these things really well. This is the difference between what you know and what you need to know for this job, or for this position, or this transition. So that's been really it's been a great part of my career, is working with you at the many places we've worked at,
Oh,
and having a network of people that as careers change, you can reach out to. Like, I have people that I now reach out to occasionally and say, hey, I think you'd be a good fit at Google. You should come apply, right? And then quite often I'll end up helping them understand what am allowed to share about the interview process, but really help them prepare their mindset, right? What do you need to, how do you need to think to act as a Googler? How do you need to represent your skill set, right? What should you do to prepare in terms? So being able to do that really feels good to be able to help others out. And down the road, that network will come back and pay you back in spades. So definitely networking is one of the things you don't want to forget.
And on top of that, thanks for the kind comments. And on top of that, when you want to network, you can't be a taker. You have to be a giver.
Yes.
I'll stress that a lot because it's funny. There was a book I read many years ago. It's called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it was a great book. And one of the comments in there was someone emailed him and said, "Hey, I want you to mentor me. Please do this for me. Please do this for me." And that whole message was about taking. It hadn't. And Richard, who was the author, actually wrote back and said, "Why would I do this for you? Why would I give you something off the street for no reason?" As much as he writes books to try to help people, you're basically just asking. So if you're not willing to give, there's really that mentality of networking will not work for you. So I say work on that. Make sure you figure out ways to give back to the community. Like this video, James, I asked you, and the first thing you said was, "Sure, when do we do it?" It wasn't a no, can you tell me more? It's that thing that goes into a lot of people's brains, like safety. I don't want to expose myself. Is this a lot of work? All that goes away with givers. And James, we worked very well together in the past because of your giving attitude. And that's the 10% I'm talking about.
That's awesome. Thanks, Rick. And one thing I want to, that made me think about that I think is a key thing, is one of the reasons people probably don't give or don't offer is there may be a bit of an imposter syndrome going on. So if you're not familiar with it, the imposter syndrome is a well known sort of mental state where you think, oh, I may have been hired for this job, but everyone around me is so much better at it than I am, right? I can't possibly be as good as Rick over there because he's just amazing. And this syndrome makes you not offer up what you know. It causes some people to say, well, maybe I should just wait till the grown-ups in the room or the more experienced people take take a lead from them, right? And when you have that mindset, you don't give because you're worried that your contribution won't be of value. But trust me, it is of value. Just showing that you're willing to give and saying, look, I'd like to contribute. What can I do to help? I can do these things. That's always a great way to start. And then as you do more of those, you gain the confidence so that you'll feel more like you have something to offer and proactively will take an opportunity to give. For example, Rick, I would have never have thought of what you're doing, right? This whole IT coaching and the video series, this is phenomenal. It's going to help so many people, and I'm so glad you're doing it. And I'm glad you asked me to be a part of it because I would have never, don't think I would have ever thought that this is something I could do, to record videos, to talk about things, to help other people like this. So this is great to have a framework to do it in.
And if you guys can look at James's face and how he actually expresses that, you could tell right away that giving attitude is right there. So with that, I'm actually gonna ask if you guys like this video, please leave a comment on my YouTube channel below, do a thumbs up, that will help us. And if you want us to, and James or myself, to address any more questions, James, will you be back if we have enough comments and questions?
Happy to. Yeah, it would be great. Thanks.
Okay, and so guys, put the comments below on the YouTube. It's getting a bit too much for me with all the different medias for me to consolidate all these questions. Like I said, I tried to consolidate about 60 questions I've got over the last week onto this conversation. So please put them on the YouTube channel. That way James and I know James is loves to look at the details like that too. So he'll look through the comments as well. If you have questions you want us to address, put them down there. Give us a like. Let us know what your thoughts are. If there's things we could do better for you guys, let us know. So as always, IT Job Coach here. Stay safe, James.
Thanks a lot.
All right. We'll catch you guys later. Have a good one.
Bye.